Good afternoon. How you doing? Enjoying the conference so far? Oh, okay, good, great. I'm sorry to say that it's, depending on when you started, if you started on Sunday or whether you started on Monday, some people started on Sunday, it's between 3/4 and 4/5 done.
Aw, I hate when it's over.
Which means that your brain should be between 3/4 and 4/5 full.
Well,
okay?
But what if they knew stuff before they came?
Well, there's not a problem, because what will happen is the stuff will just leak out of your head while you're asleep, and the best thing about it is you'll never know what it was you forgot.
And so we're here to replace all of that useless knowledge, like where your car keys are and your children's names, with Oslo.
Absolutely.
Great.
I'm Martin Gudgeon. My gorgeous and vivacious assistant is Mr. Chris Sells, the one and only. And we're going to talk to you about the repository and models. If you've been to any other Oslo talks so far, you know that Oslo is made up of 3 things. A dessert topping, which we call the M schema language, for describing models and schematizing data. A floor wax, which we call the Visual Studio Quadrant tool, which is used for visualizing models and the relationships between them. And a breakfast cereal, the repository database, which is where we store the models and from which we deploy application definitions and run them. As the slide says, you are at breakfast cereal, despite the fact that it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
So, Gudge, do you mind if I ask the audience a couple of questions?
Absolutely not.
So how many of you got to see, by show of hands, Doug Purdy's overview of Oslo? Oh, they're primed and ready, guys.
And how many of you watching on webcast got to see Doug Purdy's lap of Oslo? Great.
And now, how many got to see Don and David do the language stuff? These are hardcore guys.
Absolutely.
And then, and Florian's quadrant talk. Wow. So you got, this is the Oslo track. We have an entire
We
track
have the Oslo
just
hardcore right here.
Right.
So what is the repository? The name has been around for a while. We've been building repositories here and there for applications over a long period of time as we've been building distributed apps. Inside Microsoft, we've had many, many people building repository-type databases for particular applications like SharePoint and Dynamics CRM. What we're doing with Oslo is helping people get out of the repository business. We're going to provide a repository so that the various people that are currently building repositories and don't really want to, because it's not a core part of their business, can just use the repository services that are part of the platform and get on with their real day job.
That sounds really good, Gudge. Do we have any experience inside of Microsoft that is, in fact, a useful thing to do?
Did I mention SharePoint and Dynamics CRM?
Oh, right. Yes, you did. Absolutely, yes.
So the repository that is part of Oslo is very much designed for application metadata. Right? We believe that having the entire definition of the application in the database is a very useful thing. Currently, the definition of an application may be spread across a whole bunch of different places. Config files, assemblies on disk, maybe stuff in the registry. We've found that it's very, very compelling to have all of that definition in one place. It allows you to query it, it allows you to ask all sorts of questions about that application, and also because it's all in one place, it's relatively easy to deploy that into some runtime. So the repository that we're building as part of Oslo is optimized for storing and sharing models, optimized for initializing tables with data, and then reading that data back fairly frequently. Provides a bunch of services that we'll get to towards the latter part of this talk for things like security and some stuff around versioning. But at the end of the day, we're an application on top of SQL Server. Right, it's a natural SQL Server database. Right, we'll show you some of this as we go on. You'll be able to see we can also just use standard SQL tools to actually get at the stuff that's in the repository. Because we're just an application sitting on top of SQL Server, we make use of a bunch of things that are already built in to the SQL Server platform. We provide some things on top, Right, we provide some additional catalog information for recording stuff about the models. We'll see more about that later. We provide some security stuff with respect to providing secure views so that the underlying data tables are protected against access by nefarious people that we don't like. We provide some auditing stuff and some versioning things that I've mentioned. And then we use a bunch of the things that are already in SQL Server, like the system catalog. We use the change data capture stuff that's already in there. We configure the repository database for replication and mirroring, and we're going to be using things like SSIS for doing data migration. So all the things that you already know about SQL Server, you can just build on those as you use the Oslo repository. As part of this whole Oslo effort that we've been embarking on inside Microsoft, not only have we been designing a language to allow you folks to build models, but we've actually been modeling our own stuff inside the company. So the particular group that I work with, other parts of our organization are responsible for Windows Communication Foundation and workflow. So we've been schematizing those particular aspects of applications, building models for them, and then putting those into the repository. We've also been schematizing things around identity for storing information about organizations and groups and people. So we've been taking the stuff that we've been building and applying it to the existing technologies which you've been using, and we're putting those into the repository, and you can use those things in the repository to, as we said, deploy applications. And then there are some core pieces of the repository around the catalog, the language stuff in the bottom right-hand corner, and some other constructs that we think are going to be generally useful for pretty much anybody that's doing modeling. And as you play with the bits that are on the USB hard drive, we'd love to get feedback from you on the utility of those particular things, which things you think are good, which things you think are bad, other things you think maybe that should be in the core that you'd like to see.
Oh, and in addition to the VPC, is there anywhere else they can get the bits and play with these models?
So this is a shameless plug for the Oslo Dev Center,
absolutely,
which some guy called Chris Sells is responsible for. And you can go to that website. It's msdn.microsoft.com/Oslo. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And there's a bunch of stuff on there you can download. There'll be articles and stuff going up over the next weeks and months.
And they can download the SDK and the repository and all of these models.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Somebody actually asked me this earlier on in the conference, whether they could reverse engineer the SQL that we have for storing workflows and web services and get the M. Yes, you can, but you don't need to. We've given you the M files. Okay, so the M files are actually there as part of the SDK, and you can just go and look at them and see what the models look like and how they work.
Great. Okay, so, Gudge, I don't know if you know this or not. Oslo's a place.
It is?
Actually, I know.
I am from somewhere near Europe.
Oh, that's right, yes. So it turns out that I've actually been to Oslo, Norway. It was in, like, January, and as far as I know, they have no sunlight there at all. But I was there. And I got to go skiing where they had the Olympics, and it was all kinds of fun. And while I was there, I got the Oslo guidebook, the Traveler's Guide to Oslo. And I was thumbing through it the other day, and I realized how prophetic this book was. Everything you need to know about Oslo is already in this book. And we're just implementing it. That's all we're doing.
That's awesome.
So to demonstrate this, I've asked a native of Oslo to come up to the stage. Let's give him a hand. His name is Lars. And Lars, I've picked out a reading from the Guidebook of Oslo, if you wouldn't mind. If you could just read this little spot right there. Oh, and of course, we have the microphone right here for you. Yes, just here, I'll hold it for you.
Hi, PDC.
Yes.
Where?
This part right here is the part that's next in our talk.
That is actually in German.
That's not German. That's Norwegian. Wait. What's that? What's that?
That one I can read.
Okay, read that one then. There.
Thank you. Alle med gyldig Oslo-kort kan gå på kino for kroner 35. Tilbudet gjelder på alle kinoer i perioden mai, juni og juli. Alle forestillinger annonseres hver dag i Oslo-avisene. NB. Samtlige filmer vises i originalversjon med norske undertekster. Vi har de nyeste filmene, og i kinoer, skal vi se her, og kinoer med aircondition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You can have a seat now, Lars. So, for those of you who don't speak Norwegian, what Lars just said is the Oslo SDK comes with a variety of tools. I told you how prophetic it was.
It's uncanny.
I know. So, in the Oslo SDK, we have IntelliPad and a bunch of integration with Visual Studio. Those of you who have seen the Oslo talks have seen the Visual Studio stuff. You've seen IntelliPad stuff. We will be doing IntelliPad. We kind of like IntelliPad. It's the free thing that ships with the SDK. Those of you who remember Doug's talk have already seen m.exe, the M compiler. We'll show you the integration with that in IntelliPad. It integrates with MS Build. There's we've had the M executable, mx.exe, which actually loads models into SQL. And of course, once they're there, right, we've mentioned this a couple of times, it's just SQL. You can program it however you like. And Gudge, we have gone for like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, and we've all of this silly PowerPoint.
Actually, only 11.
Is it really? It seems like so much longer. Wow. Okay, so even so, 10 minutes without coding, and I'm a little twitchy.
I can tell.
Could we pull up America's favorite modeling development environment? IntelliPad.exe. Here it is. Great. So you guys have seen this tool already. And to get things started, I would like to model something. Now, one of the models that we ship, in fact, a family of models that we ship in the repository SDK, or the Oslo SDK that you can download today, is a series of models about identity. System.identity is the module name. And it has a bunch of things in it, but the core table, the core type, is called parties. And its job is to keep track of a bunch of things like people and groups and organizations and that kind of thing.
And I believe you've been invited to lots of parties this week.
I have been. Somebody compared me to Lindsay Lohan, the number of parties I got to go to, which was nice. And I like to think I'm just that svelte, yes?
Absolutely. And vivacious.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Anyway, so the parties table has all kinds of stuff in it. And in fact, we have preloaded a bunch of parties data, a bunch of people, into the repository so we could do this demo. And two of the people in this table are you and I, Gudge.
They are, yes,
we are,
absolutely.
And we're in there. And so one of the things that we would like to do, well, Gudge, how long have we known each other?
I think we've known each other at least 10 years.
Really? It seems longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On my side, too.
Yeah. So, but we've been friends for some
period of that time.
Some period of that.
Yeah.
And in fact, we've become such fast friends that we would really like to model that in this new world. So we would like to model, in general, this idea of friendship so that we can then create an instance of Gudge and I as friends and tell the world, come out of the closet.
Sounds great.
As far as those things go. So, Gudge, if you could give us a module name.
I can. Let me just...
You might want to set the zoom a little bit. 2.0, great. How's that for the cheap seats in the back? You guys okay? Good, 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 good. Great.
I think I need to save this file, Chris. I'm not getting any...
Those of you who have seen IntelliPad, we know we have a special M mode, which gives us IntelliSense and all kinds of wonderful things. So we want to save it as an M file. Call it friendship.m. Wonderful. Great.
There we go.
And so, as I mentioned...
It's coloring the text now. I can see it.
Yeah, well, it's grayizing the text now, yes. Very stylish. Absolutely. Yes. Okay, so... as I mentioned, there are models that ship in the repository. Called the module name for them is system.identity. So let's import that so that we can take advantage of the models that ship already in the repository. Great. Oh,
I have red squigglies.
Have you misspelled it?
That's why. No, I have not misspelled it.
Okay, so the basic problem here is that IntelliPad is doing us a service. It is saying, I understand that you would like to import this set of types, but I don't know a thing about them. So we can tell it.
Great. How do I do that?
And we do it in IntelliPad the exact same way we would do it in Visual Studio. What we need is a project, MS Build project. And so we can do that by going to the M mode menu and saying, what is it, create? What is it called?
Add buffer to project.
Add buffer to project.
Snappily named.
Yes. You can tell engineers wrote these menu items. Yes. And so, notice that we've created...
Wait till you see the UI of an app we have later.
Oh, yes. Okay, so we have an mproj on the right, and it shows our one file, but still the red squigglies haven't gone away. And the reason they haven't gone away is because we also have to add a reference to the set of types. Now, you may have remembered Mr. Purdy said that you can think of compiled M files. When you take a set of M files and you compile them together, you get an image, and that's kind of like the M version of an assembly. So it's got a bunch of pre-compiled types in it. So what we want to do is go to the add a reference to the set of types that defines system.identity, which we can do by choosing add reference. Now, Mr. Gudgeon, you already know. Go ahead, you're doing fine. Didn't mean to startle you there. Sorry. Seemed a little jumpy.
I'm easily startled.
Yes. Remember, Mr. Gudgeon said that we ship all of the M for all the models that come in the repository. And in fact, we also ship a compiled version of those already in an image file, which is called models.mx. It's right there. So let's add that. Ah, yes.
Oh, I'm so happy now.
The
Are we
red
done?
squigglies go away. Are we done?
Is that it? Is
Yes.
that all we have
No,
to do?
I think we.
No?
So now that we have that, let's go ahead and create our friendship type. Wonderful. And a friendship is just a reference to two parties.
And they have such great names.
So here we're saying we have somebody called a context party, which is an instance of that party. Now remember, party can be any old thing, but we're going to use it to be a couple of people. And we have a reference party. And that's almost enough, except because we're doing repository work, because we want to leverage the functionality of the repository, one of the things we want to be able to do is have references to instances of friend types. And to do that, we want to give it an ID. And integer 32 should be plenty.
I really like you a lot. I might need lots of rows in the database that say that you're my friend.
Great. So we're saying identity ID, except you got capital I there. See, IntelliPad is doing us service.
It's just so good.
Great. And the other thing you might want to do is turn on auto numbering.
And what does that do?
What that does is in the SQL it says, I would like you to just create me an ID for each one of these automatically. I don't want to have to think about it. Great.
I love that.
And so we're almost there. We have the type that defines the things we want to store, but we need the storage. So let's create an extent. Remember, Mr. Purdy talked about extent. Now, for those of you, how many people are familiar? I assume a lot of you, but how many are SQL guys? You write SQL and it's a pleasant experience. Oh, wait, some of the hands went down. So, those of you familiar with SQL, types don't really have any mapping in SQL. I mean, you can think of these as the set of columns in a table, but really, in SQL, we have tables, right? And so in M, we've split those apart, but we want storage for instances of friends, so let's go ahead and do that. And also, Mr. Gudgeon, if you wouldn't mind, we have here something called friendships, which will map to a table in SQL.
Oh. Yep.
Friendship star. And then we also have to tell M where the storage for our reference context party and reference party will come from. So we're going to add a constraint here that says context parties and parties. And remember, this is in system.identity, so this is the table we've defined already as part of the repository. And reference parties and parties. Okay, the red squigglies went away.
The red squigglies have gone away.
Now, what have we done? We've created a new type, which is keeping track of pairs of people, so we can say we're friends. We have set up storage for that, and we've got it all inside of a project. So we should be able to build and get something useful. Let's try that. Here's the building.
Compiler's running.
It's
doing something.
It must be good. It's taking a long time.
It's bringing in all those models that are in the image file.
I mean, you can think of how long the compiler takes. That's how much effort we don't have to do.
That's one good way of thinking.
That's right.
I like. Oh, look, lots of output.
So if we scroll down to the bottom, good. We were able to compile successfully. Excellent. Yep. So now we have built an MX file, and we've generated SQL. Gudge, let's take a look at the stuff we've generated.
You want to see the SQL?
I want to see the SQL.
Okay.
So automatically, the set of tools we have, when we create an mproj file, it'll actually give us a project name, and it'll pick a spot in the file system. And then that's where it'll put the output. So go ahead and load models.sql. And we have a bunch of code. Let's take a look at the interesting code. Scroll down and look at the Now, one of the things that has been mentioned a couple of times is that the idea of M is that there's a natural mapping to SQL. And that's very true. If you have an M type, you would think, and in fact, if we use plain old SQL, which we can generate with our set of compilers, if you get plain old SQL, you can think, aha, this extent maps to a table directly. Okay? And that's great, right up until you want to do things like versioning, where you want to change how the storage is, but make sure the views are the same for existing clients, or right up until you want to put in your own security, maybe on the row basis. I mean, the tables are great up until you want to add features to those tables, and suddenly you want views. Okay? So what we have done in the repository is we have set up another command line switch on m.exe that says, I would like a repository-specific SQL. And what this does is the repository comes with several hundred models, as well as a bunch of core models and a bunch of core services. And those core services support things like versioning and security and deployment, and we'll talk about those later. But what that means is that when you generate your types, you're actually getting two things. You're getting a table, just like you'd expect. Gudge, could we look at the table?
Here is the table.
And notice the naming, friendship table. Okay, this is the underlying storage. This thing is not accessible to anybody except the database administrator. Okay? So secure by default, you can't get to the storage. Okay? Instead, we go through the view, which is a fully updatable view. Okay? So in the generated SQL, we support all of the insert and update and delete, all of that stuff, and we do it with the repository support for security and versioning, and we'll see how those features work. But you should know we've got the table and the view. And the view is where we stick that extra functionality. Okay? So we built all of the types into the repository with this set of tools, with this set of mappings. So when you look at all the repository data, it'll be these two pairs, views and tables. And when you build your own custom types to extend the repository, you'll get the same set of features that we're using. Okay? Great. So the other thing that was generated, can we look at the other thing that was generated?
We can.
The other thing that was generated is the MX file. This is the set of compiled models. Okay? This is just a file on the file system. It's a zip file. You can take it around. You can copy it. You can send it via email. You can use it to update a repository on a specific machine. And that, in fact, that's what we want to do. Gudge, can we go to look at our current repository instance in SQL Server?
We can. Which bit would you like to look at? Would you like to look at the views?
I would like to look at the views because that's how we think of things.
Okay,
now,
so
is there anything in the Microsoft.pdc realm?
Let's see.
Have we preloaded the repository with any data?
Management. I think P comes between M and R.
Because I know, Microsofties, sometimes conference presenters are kind of shifty. They preload things. And
No, there's nothing beginning with P.
All right, so let's go ahead and deploy our MX file. Going back to IntelliPad. We go back to our M mode and say deploy to repository. And so this just assumes the local repository database. And now notice it's running, well, you probably can't see it. It's running mx.exe, so it's taking that MX and loading it into the repository. And now let's go back and refresh and make sure that we've got that type. Refresh. Great. Microsoft.pdc.friendships, and you want to just look at the generated SQL just so we can see what the columns are, make sure it makes sense. Great. ID, context party, reference party, just like we'd expect. Okay? Great. Great. So that was easy. Now, that's wonderful, but what we still haven't done, we still haven't declared our friendship to the world, Gudge.
We have not.
We have set up a space for us to do so, a closet for us to come out of, but we haven't, in fact, come out. So, let's fire up. Let's see. How could we do this? What database technologies could we use to talk to the SQL database?
There are so many to choose from.
Yes. In fact, I saw one of the titles of one of the talks here at the PDC was Microsoft Data Access Technology A to Z. And I figured that means that we've had 26 different three-letter acronyms for the database technology access tools that we've got.
That seems like
a
not unfair statement.
Yeah. So, of course, you can use, we're already running SQL Server Management Studio. We could use that. SQL command on the command line, we could use that. ADO, ADO.NET, DAO, RDO, Excel, Access. We have so many choices.
It's great.
So today, since we're .NET developers, I don't really know how to run Access. But I do know how to run a compiler. So let's fire up Dev 10. Visual Studio 2010.
Software from the future.
Absolutely.
And we're going to need some kind of application.
Yeah, let's build just a little console application to make sure that, so we can talk about how we want to get to this data. Now, how many people have used like the entity framework or Link or those kinds of things? Great. And so you're familiar with the set of tools that allows you to walk up to any old database and say, I would like a mapping into objects so that I can program against it and press dot and get a list of things. I'm a big fan of that programming model. I've heard so many things about that dynamic stuff, but I need IntelliSense. That's me. So.
Is that why you have all those domain names?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay. That's a whole different fetish. So.
Too much information.
Yes, well, you asked. It's your own fault. So, one of the things that I've done that too. I've run SQLmetal.exe at the command line. I've drag and drop things. I've used EDM gen, right? And those tools are wonderful. But one of the things I always have problems with is, that information in the database is about the table, not the type of the instances of the stuff in the table. So, for example, remember we had two things, right? We had friendship, the type. So you can think of, from an object point of view, when you're programming against it, every row is kind of an instance of the friendship object. And we have friendships, the collection of these things, right? Which is the table name in SQL. But only the table name exists in SQL, right? We don't have the name of the type. And so, we have these wacky command line switches that say /pluralize, and we try to reverse engineer the English and try to get back from the plural to the singular when we do the naming of things. And
that's probably harder in Norwegian.
Who knows? I don't. I thought German was Norwegian, so clearly I know nothing. So, in M, we have this data. We know the type name is friendship, the entity or the extent name is friendships. So we should be able to do a better job with extra metadata. And in fact, that's the whole point of what we're doing. We have extra data about your data, so we can do a better job. So we have a little tool, a little prototype tool called MX2EDMX, which takes an M image file, and it gives us an EDMX file. An EDMX file, go ahead and run the tool, Gudge.
I'm still trying to remember where we put the file.
That's fine. Keep doing that. An EDMX file is, in fact, the designer file that Visual Studio uses to capture the metadata that the entity framework needs to be able to create instances of things and map them to the backend database and all that kind of thing. So instead of creating an EDMX file from the database, which is what EDMgen and those kinds of tools do, we actually create it without going to the database at all, but directly from the M data, the compiled M data. Okay?
It's generated something called models.edmx.
Great. So why don't we go back to our console project and take this file and add it. And will good things happen if we do this? You didn't say yes.
I missed the question.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I wasn't listening. I was doing
what,
something else.
What kind of an example are you setting for the audience?
Can I plead the Fifth Amendment?
Oh, okay.
No, I'm not American.
So let's go ahead and look at the solution. Oh.
Great. So we have an EDMX file in our solution.
So what happens?
Just brought it in. I don't know what it looks like.
So go ahead and double-click on that.
And we have...
So this is the designer view. This is exactly what you would get if you would do the drag and drop. But notice, no S, right? It knows that specifically the name of the type that we want to manipulate. When we say new, it's a friendship. Okay? So we can do all kinds of things with this extra metadata. We could put in client-side validation code so you don't have to go back to the database, but you could still have the same validation code on both ends. There's all kinds of wonderful things we could do with that extra metadata, and this is but one example of that kind of thing. But that means that we should have a more pleasant programming experience. So let's go back to our main and go ahead and create a database context so that we can talk to our repository database with EDM. Microsoft PDC entities is the name of the thing that was generated. We dropped all the dots out of things and put entities on the end. Then we have a very intuitive connection string that anyone should be able to copy and paste without any problems. Great.
Okay, I have that.
And so let's go ahead, and this is the part that we've been waiting for all this time. How long did it take us?
We're nearly halfway through the talk.
Okay,
In fact,
great.
we're just over halfway through the talk.
Okay. So we have, notice the S there, friendships. So we've got the friendships collection, and we're creating a new friendship that we're adding. And go ahead and create that row. And speaking of friendly programming models, notice that Gudge has memorized our IDs from the database to write this code. Wonderful. And which one are you and which one am I?
You are the context party because your name begins with C.
Right. And, okay, let's not continue that metaphor, shall we? Good. Great. So let's go ahead and run this code. We've worked so hard to get to this point so we can declare our undying friendship. Press the F5 key with 1.5 pounds of pressure, and
There were no errors.
there were no errors.
So life must be good.
Okay. I don't feel like anything's been created.
You
The
don't?
fact that it didn't crash, I don't know if that's good enough.
Okay.
So
You
let's
wanna go
write a
look?
little bit more code. Let's comment out the add friendship code so we don't. Oh, wait, no.
Let's not.
Well, we could leave it in because we have that wonderful automatic ID stuff. Every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings.
That's from It's a Wonderful Life.
I have no idea what that means. I don't know why I just said that. So let's go ahead and use the built-in stuff in EDM. Context.friendships. Again, notice the name of the collection. Console.writeline. And this is your small window of creativity. Aw, that's so sweet.
Okay.
Great. So let's go ahead and run that. What should we expect to see? We should expect to see it twice, right? Because we're going to run the insert code twice. And that should be fine because we have an auto ID and all the right stuff is happening for us under the covers. So when we see it twice.
Oh.
Really? What happened? Oh, wait, where'd you put your breakpoint?
Oh, you know what we didn't do? You know what we didn't do?
No?
You know that thing you kept telling me that we had to do every time we practiced this demo?
Oh, right, and I forgot to tell you this time.
And then you forgot to tell me this time, and I forgot too.
Wow, you remembered this time, though. I just looked at that code for a long time.
Great. So let's try again.
There's one.
Well, there's only one because we didn't
Right.
save it last time.
That's right. That's right. There's only one. But if we run it one more time, we can be double friends,
If we run it one more time.
like a double pinky swear.
With the cherry on top.
Look at that. Great. Good. Good. So now people know we're friends.
Absolutely.
It's in the database. It must be true. Great. So, guys, let's go back to the slides just to make sure we've covered what we intended to cover. Those PDC people so much liked us to have slides that we prepared and then callously ignored. Great. We talked all about this. This was what we read about in Norwegian, as it turns out.
Indeed.
We try to read
Perfect
about
setup.
Yes. We take any number of M files, feed them to m.exe. We happen to have that integrated into iPad, so you could pick it up from the
And is that
menu?
integration in the bits on the USB?
The
drive that they're
integration,
getting?
that, as it turns out, IntelliPad, so let's see, let me answer your question. No, unfortunately. But luckily, we have a website for such things. I heard so much about. Yeah, so the commands, IntelliPad is extensible, and so we have a little Python script that adds those menu items, and I will be putting it up on the website. So they can download it and do exactly what we just did. Great. m.exe is the compiler. We get an image file. We use the image file with mx.exe. We load it into SQL Server. Great. We talked all about m.exe. Here's an example of using the command line. Not as fun as IntelliPad. Oh, yeah, we saw all this. Oh, wait, back up. That /t repository on the command line, that means I want the repository SQL that splits things between table and view. By default, it will just give us just a table, plain old SQL. Okay, great. And here's an example of, or here's a picture that shows the Visual Studio integration, which does all of the stuff I just showed you in IntelliPad. If you would prefer to use Visual Studio, it works in Dev 9 and Dev 10. Okay, great. Here's, if you're an MS Build person, this is what the inside of mproj looks like. And here's an example of using M to package into MX file. We saw this. Here's referencing other things. We saw this when we pulled in models.mx, which is the pre-compiled version of all of the repository models. We saw this. And we did the demo. And we talked about all this. And we did this demo too. You were worried that we were behind. Look at all the stuff we did. Great, great.
Wonderful.
Oh, wait, Gudge.
Do you have more readings from the Book of Oslo?
This is a perfect time for another reading from the Book of Oslo. And now that I know the difference between German and Norwegian,
yeah.
You know, I'm actually Norwegian.
By heritage?
I am, yes. Plus, I'm big, you know. Because it says right here, Oslo is the Viking capital.
And you
That's
feel like
me.
a Viking?
I do. Oslo
I now know
empowers me.
what to buy you for Christmas.
Yes. So, wow, I had another reading. Oh, where is it? Where is it? Oh, I don't want to read the wrong thing. Because then they wouldn't understand.
And that would be terrible.
Yes.
And you need something that really sets up the next section.
Oh, here it is. Fred og ro midt I, Oslo Centrum. What's that word?
Atmosfære?
That's like French. Atmosfære og H and J together. H to mit I Centrum. Never had one lesson. Which is clearly a metaphor for
the 4 services that
Yes.
we're going to talk about that are in the repository
Yes.
as part of the implementation that we're shipping.
all of it's in here, right
Great.
in here.
So we're going to talk about these 4 services. We've actually seen some of the deployment story already. Right? We can take M files, compile them through the compiler, and then use MX to actually deploy those things into the repository. We've just seen models. You can actually write down instances in the M language as well, which will be deployed into the repository as actual rows in the tables that get created. In addition, we can actually export packages from the repository. For example, if you want to be able to load them into another repository. You can actually export things that you previously loaded and then load them into a different repository. In addition to deploying the models to the repository, because we've been thinking about this whole idea of having the application definition in the database, then one of the things that we really want to be able to do, it's great to get the application definition in the database, but at some point we want to run it. You know, one of the core premises of Oslo is that we have executable models. A lot of the modeling things that we've seen before have been very much, you have models that you use for communicating between people, that you use to talk between your business analysts and your architects and your developers, and they all use it to kind of communicate about the application. But then the thing that the computer actually runs, the thing that we actually hand off to the machine, isn't actually that model. It's a different model. And what we're trying to get to in Oslo is where it's the same model. Right? We have a model that we use to communicate with humans, and we have a model that we use to communicate with machines. For example, we can define web services in some of the models that we've defined as part of Oslo, and we can actually load those up into the runtime and actually have them execute.
Well, so, Gudge, I have to ask. Because we looked at deploying models in the repository, extending the repository, custom types. With mx.exe, can we look at that whole cool deploying applications too?
We can look at that. Would you like me to tell them the security story first, and then we can show them both things, or do you just want to go just straight there?
Yeah. We've had like 2 slides in a row. I'm already...
You're already tired of
I am,
slides. You're
yes.
already tired of bullet points.
Yes.
Great, okay. So if you switch to the little UI app.
Or do we want to do that, or do we want to show... Well, okay. Do we want to show them Where the application will go?
Oh, okay. So the application will go, if you run up a browser. We're just going to deploy a web service in a moment. And again, in the interest of showing you that we haven't pre-deployed it, and it doesn't yet exist, it should be our HTTP, localhost, yeah, that one there. Friendship, create friendships, .xaml-x.
So it's not there.
Yeah, I don't like that's a 404. I don't like 404s.
Let's fix it.
We should deploy something there. So actually, can we go and have a look at the application definition in the database?
Great, let's do that.
So if you load up, we have a few pre-canned queries here. And if you select the one that is pretty much front and center there,
This one?
that one right there,
Great.
and you change the database to repository,
Oh.
we don't actually store them in the master
Oh,
database.
right, yes.
People tend to frown on you when you do that kind of thing.
All this SQL stuff is so confusing.
So we're going to look in the repository database, which is where we actually store the models. And we're going to run that. And this is part of the application definition. The application definition is actually spread across a whole bunch of tables. But things that we can see here are which application pool it goes into, directory browsing turned on, what the execute permission is, what's the physical path that it's going to get deployed to, what's the virtual directory called, that kind of thing. And then there's a bunch of other tables which contain the workflow definition that actually makes up the implementation of the create friendship method, the activities that form the body of that workflow, et cetera, et cetera.
So, guys, what you're saying is we have already populated the repository with a series of rows in the application model to describe a web service that is implemented with a workflow.
Yes.
And it's all in here, right? I mean, it's all in the database. There's no extra stuff. It's all using Dublin and our stuff and Oslo and all of that stuff. No code, no semicolons were harmed in the making of this web service.
Absolutely.
Great. And do we have a tool that allows us to build such things interactively in, say, a graphical fashion?
The floor wax.
Yes.
Yes. Visual Studio Quadrant. We have a tool to actually allow you to look at workflows, edit them, and other models, but particularly workflows.
Yeah. So we've just used that to populate the database with.
Indeed.
Great. So now what can we do?
So now we can deploy the web service. And I happen to know that it has an ID of 26, so we're going to deploy that. If you hit deploy, we should get a little pop-up message which says that it's been deployed. This is just running a query against the database, pulling together all the pieces of the application, and building something that the runtime can actually use.
Now, is this all wacky, proprietary, gudgeon-only code, or is this using...
No, this is just using stuff that ships as part of... it's on the VPC. There's just some tools there that allow you to pull stuff out of the database and deploy them.
And in this particular case, remind me the name of the tool?
It's called XAML to from repository. That's
Great.
TO, to from repository.
Great. So we've just deployed the application. So if we go back to the browser,
If you go back to the browser,
R404 should be gone, yes? If I press refresh,
it'll
with
now
1.5.
load the XAML file that we basically created, which is what the runtime knows how to load and execute. And we should get some kind of page telling us, yes, there's a service here, and you can do these kind of things with it. And there we go.
Great.
OK. So would you like to go and write a client against that?
Absolutely. Oh, I already have...
You already have a copy of
Yes.
software from the future. So we need another console application.
We're using software from the future to build applications from the past.
And we need to add a service reference to the service that we were just deploying. And I bet if you drop down there, that's already
And that's
there.
just the URI to the...
Yep,
app we
URI
just
to the
built.
application.
Great.
And there's a bunch of stuff going on. It's figuring out what interfaces it exposes and what methods, what operations there are and what they look like and what parameters they take and all that kind of thing.
And that's just all shipping bits, right? That's just WCF.
That's just normal WCF. Well, this is the .NET 4.0 WCF.
Oh, right.
OK, so var, use your imagination, equals new service reference, something like that?
Yes. Service reference.
Dot.
Create friendships client.
Indeed, we'll have one of those. And then we'll say client dot create friendship. And it takes two numbers. And those two numbers are, Chris.
I have no idea.
10. You can't remember?
124.
I'm beginning to doubt your commitment to our friendship.
238.
328. But you were really, really close this time.
328. That was the Norwegian spelling.
Great. Fantastic. So can you run that?
I can.
Great. And now we know why we were going to do the security part of the talk first, before we did this particular demonstration.
No, we did this on purpose. Shh, don't tell them. We did this on purpose. Look, we've just demonstrated it's secure by default. Huh? Huh? No? All right.
No. But you were close, again. Okay, great. So the problem is that the application definition that we have in the database is expecting a somewhat different model for friendship than the one that we actually have in there right now. So we only have two choices. We could talk about the security stuff, and then go and modify the model, and then the web service would just work, or we can go modify the web service. And then we'll have to modify it back again, though.
No, we definitely...
So let's not do that.
Yeah.
So
we're fundamentally
let's
lazy.
talk about how the security stuff works in the repository. And then we'll update the model to take advantage of that, and then the web service will actually be running against the table that it expects. Security in the repository is claims-based. And your identity, that is the logon that you're currently running as, whether you're a human actually interacting with the machine directly or whether you're some application running under some particular principle, is just one aspect that we can record as claims. There may be other things that you want to express as claims to the system. So your user ID is one. You might want to record something like age. Right? A claim that just says, I'm over 21, I'm over 18, I'm over 15, I'm over 13. Claims get presented to the system, and claims are used to figure out what operations you can perform on what resources. And the operations that we currently have in the repository today on this machine are read and update. And the resources that we know about are things called folders, and we've modeled some of those, and we're going to see that in a moment. The repository keeps track of all these claims and all the resources and the operations with just another set of tables. Right? So it's all just SQL data. And the views that we generate, if we were to go back and look at the generated SQL that we saw in IntelliPad, there are a bunch of triggers that get written out that are attached to the view definition that run when you do inserts and updates and that kind of thing. And one of the things those triggers do is they check the security claims that are needed to actually perform a given operation and ensure that whatever principal it is, whoever it is actually trying to perform that operation, has the required claims. And so again, as Chris said, there's no direct access to the tables.
Right.
It's all going through the view, and we run these checks to figure out whether you're actually allowed to do the update or not. I'm sorry, Chris?
And so when our console client crashed, that was in fact a feature. I'm not kidding.
So we use these things called folders to partition data. Applications get to decide what data goes into folders, and this actually gives us a security story which is somewhat more granular than tables. So you can actually have a bunch of rows in a given storage, in a given table, and some of those rows can be in one folder and some of those rows can be in another folder. And they can have different security requirements to access them. And folders are also hierarchical, so you can actually have folders be parented by other folders, in which case the security story works much like it would for folders in the file system. You know, things that are in there, you get the permission, you need the permissions that are specified by the parent unless the actual object specifies more specific requirements. So the security checks happen on folder boundaries. And right now, we just create a field called folder inside a given model. And when we do that /t repository thing in the compiler, it looks for these things and then generates all of that security code for us when it emits the SQL. So should we go and edit the model?
Yes.
So we're just going to go to our friendship, and we're going to take a folder. We're going to make it integer 32. We're going to save the file. We're then going to rebuild and redeploy. thinking hard. It's thinking hard about all those models in models.mx.
So when we deploy this time, there's already an existing friendship type. What's going to happen?
So right now, because of the way we're running the loader, MX, it's going to recognize that there's already a table in there, and it's going to overwrite it. It's going to drop that table and create a new table with the additional folder in.
Got it.
With the additional column.
So that's what we just did. We just deployed.
So we just did that. So if we now go back to SQL Management Studio and look at, you'll need to refresh that and look at the columns, then we now have that folder column. Okay, great. Let's go back to the client that was running against the web service and rerun it. Now, right now, all we've done is update the table definition. We haven't actually granted any access to anybody, so we're still getting an error when we actually try and do something. So what we need to do is we actually need to say we want to grant access to a particular principal with a particular claim to that folder. So if we go to this app, we have this grant user access to folder.
Oh, wait. What folder is this?
So that folder is just happens to be the folder where we've chosen to put the friendship.
And where are the folders defined? In like an app.config file?
They are defined in the database, like everything else.
Could I look at them if I wanted?
You can go and look at them. There's a little query there. So we just picked one of the built-in folders to actually store this stuff in. You can create your own folders for particular purposes. And
so we just built a service. We want to secure it, so we're deploying it into the services folder.
Indeed.
Great.
So we're using folder 102. We're going to grant access to a particular user. All this code is doing is just calling a stored procedure that updates the repository tables with the relevant information about which claim you need, what resource it applies to, what operations that allows you to perform. Basically just updates those tables. Okay, access granted.
Woohoo.
That's good. Rerun the client.
Dun, dun, dun.
It died again?
Is this crash also a feature?
What did you do this time?
Don't we have to redeploy something?
What's the error?
I don't know.
Can I see? I need to see the error.
It didn't crash that time.
It didn't crash that time. Great. Okay. So can we actually go and see if there's anything in the table? We could use our...
Oh, we could use our previous client.
Except, yeah, you need to comment out the add code. Otherwise, they won't believe that the web service actually added the code.
I have that power.
Oh, look at that. It's there.
Woo.
Great. Fantastic.
So this is now a secure friendship.
It's now a secure friendship.
So we
yes.
could...
I feel secure in our friendship.
Yes. That's why you wore that pink shirt the other day. I got it.
Great. So in addition to the deployment story and the security story, we also have a catalog, which is part of the repository. Those of you that are familiar with SQL Server will know that SQL has a system catalog, systables, sysviews, that kind of things. Keeps track of all the SQLisms that are in the database and the relationships between them. The repository catalog keeps track of all the repositoryisms, so things about the models, right? Models for models, if you like. So we can see the relationships between models, the relationships between the models and the SQL constructs that we actually generated from those models. But we're really just extending the SQL Server catalog. And we can use that for a bunch of things, including we can do a much better job of exporting if we've got all of that metadata about the models in the repository. We can export reasonable images. We can do export against just raw SQL, but it's not as good because we don't have as much information. You can do things like impact analysis. You can say, well, if I'm going to change this model, where else is this model used in the system? How many places is that actually going to touch? And as we saw earlier, we ran some data access generation code off the image file, but given that all that information is actually in the catalog as well, you could actually run that data access generation code straight off the repository catalog to get that nice friendship thing rather than the friendships, and do all sorts of other interesting data access.
So we could go to the nice folks in the EDM team and say, hey, if you run up against the repository, there's all kinds of extra metadata in there, and you could in fact do the same kind of rich data access layer generation that we just did with our little tool. Great. Great. Now, versioning. This is, remember from the Book of Oslo, this is the fourth big service that the repository provides for us. How many people have ever had to deploy a database? How many have ever had to deploy a second version of that database? How many people have enjoyed the experience? No? Nobody? Huh.
I think there was one hand at the back.
Oh, really?
On the left.
He has too much free time on his hands, apparently. Yes. So we have a couple of versioning stories in Oslo. Actually, we have several. These are two of them because versioning cuts across many lines. The one I was just talking about, the idea of versioning the database itself, we can think of as schema evolution. We'll talk about that one in a second. The other one we handle is if you've got multiple versions of the repository. Remember we said that repositories are going to be a family of databases. And sometimes those are different kinds of repositories with different kinds of data. And sometimes the families include multiple copies of the single set of data across different machines. Maybe they're multiple different server machines, in which case you're trying to do load balancing. Maybe they're across a server machine and maybe an occasionally connected client. And you want the client to be able to keep running with the data it's got cached and then sync the changes when you reconnect the client and the server. Okay? So those are two kinds of very important kinds of data change synchronization we need to do when we've got data anywhere, and especially true in a repository. And in this case, remember we said that we built on SQL Server and we enable replication. Okay? That's all we have to do. Because we're of the kind of table definitions we're defining with IDs and surrogate keys and a natural mapping, we get this kind of functionality right from SQL. So we can use plain old SQL Server replication that they have been working on and honing and optimizing for version after version to keep multiple copies of the same repository database on multiple servers in sync. We're using the built-in SQL Server tools you already know. Okay? And likewise, we can use OCS, the occasionally connected system stuff, again, built into SQL Server, to support the occasionally connected client scenario. So again, using the built-in tools in SQL. So you can just keep doing that, and that works great. Okay? Now, from a schema evolution point of view, well, let's see a demo, or let's see an example. Let's go to the next slide. Okay? So on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see the friendship type that we built, Gudge and I built. And we were programming against it, and that worked just fine. Okay? And we had our extent and our type. Great. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll notice that we want to extend that type. Okay, we want to add more data. This is a very common thing to want to do. In fact, this is probably the 80% case. We want to take an existing table and we want to add more data. Okay? Now, if you're doing this by hand, that means generally replicating the database to another database, changing the SQL, rerunning the SQL on the new database for the type or types that you want to change. And it means running some kind of data migration tool. So you can go from the old data and map all the new data with whatever defaults or whatever algorithm you want to use to populate the new set of data. Okay? And then, of course, the other thing we want to do is we want to make sure that you get a view so that old clients get only the data they were expecting. Maybe they did select star and they'll freak out if they get more columns than they were supposed to get. Okay? Or when they do inserts, we want default values to be put in there so that old clients can still continue to work, right? That's the versioning challenge when you're changing schemas, right? You want existing clients to continue to work, okay? Now remember, in the repository, we already give you a view. We provide an updatable view to isolate you for just this kind of scenario. So notice in the M on the right-hand side, we actually create a friendship 2 with a new column. Gudge and I were adding multiple rows into the database to express our level of friendship for each other. That's probably not a good way to model such things. So we've added a field directly into an extension of the model, and we have built an extent to hold instances of that data. Okay? And that's great for new clients, but what about old clients? Remember, old clients are expecting that updatable friendship friendships view. Okay? So what we do is we use the language facilities in M itself to say, hey, we've got a view now called friendships. It's going to be updatable. Where does that data come from? Well, now it's stored in the friendship to table. Oh, and by the way, notice the type we're handing out. We're handing out instances of friendship. So only that data will be handed back to the client. So they'll see exactly what they saw before, while new clients get the new functionality. Okay? And what about the data migration step, the transformation of all your existing rows that didn't have this field? Well, again, we've got the tools built right into SQL Server, right? SSIS is your friend. Okay? And there's a visual design experience, and there's all kinds of ID preservation stuff, and this stuff all works great. You can just use all of that. Okay? Great.
Okay, Chris. So we're almost out of time.
Oh, yeah?
In fact, we're a few minutes into the Q&A, but I just wanted to do one more thing before we finish.
Great.
Because, you know, the problem with our friendship still is that it's in this machine.
Nobody knows.
And it's only in this machine.
Nobody would ever know.
And I happened to notice that while you were talking last, an extra button popped up on the little UI thing.
This is that dynamic
and it seems
feature
like,
thing.
you know, there's been a lot of talk about the cloud and services in the cloud. And wouldn't it be great if we could deploy instances of our friendship to the cloud so everybody in the world could know about it?
I don't know. Oh. I mean, yes, that would be awesome.
Great.
Let's
Fantastic.
do that.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a poor man's version of the fantastic little browser that Don Box and Chris Anderson showed in yesterday's keynote. And just to show you again that there's currently nothing up there, I'm just going to run a little query to just show that currently there's just nothing there.
I'm sorry. Okay. Question mark Q equals.
Yeah, I could type the entire URI if you really want me to, but
yes,
as I said,
yes,
we're a little bit over on time.
All right.
So I'm gonna skip that step. Now I have a little tool that I wrote called M to SDS.
And what's SDS again, Doug?
SQL Data Services.
Doug.
You can call me Doug.
Yeah,
we're good friends, but you can still call me Doug.
Yes. This is because we haven't deployed to the cloud yet.
That's right. So what I can do is I can actually compile some M, and that M actually has an instance in it that basically represents our friendship. And once I've compiled that, I can actually deploy that to the cloud. And what this is doing is it's walking over something called the M semantic graph, which is something that the compiler emits as part of the image. And is accessible to you through the compiler framework stuff that's on the VPC. And it's walking that graph and then going up against the cloud to see if there's already instances of those models in there. And what it's finding is that there isn't anything for system.identity, so it goes and creates something. It looks for something called Chris, can't find it, so it creates an entity for Chris. Looks for an entity called Gudge, can't find it, creates an entity for me. Then creates Microsoft.pdc to store the friendships, and then sets the context party and the reference party to be just URIs. So if we quickly flip back to this little query app, then we now see that there are a couple of containers in there. And if we say Microsoft.pdc...
So we've just mapped our data, our M data,
the friendship
to
data,
the standard model in SQL Server in the cloud.
Yep.
And we've just pushed our data, just like we were doing before with mx.exe.
Yep.
We just have pushed our data into the cloud. And so we're running queries against it now.
Yes. And you'll see there's context party, there's reference party. The references are just URIs, because things in the cloud are identified by URIs. So I can now go and get Chris.
And this is all live. This is going.
This is just going straight against the cloud right now. Yeah.
Great. And what if you? So are you in there too? If you could.
So if I type Gudge.
And so I'm curious. Is this case sensitive?
No, it's not case sensitive. Yes, it is case sensitive.
I see. Awesome.
Okay. So now the entire world knows about our friendship.
Wow.
And I'm much happier.
Well and truly out of the closet. Great. So. The repository is the store. Remember, we've got three things. We've got the languages, M, and the series of related languages. We've got the graphical tool, Quadrant, as well as a bunch of SDK tools like IntelliSense or Telepad and Visual Studio integration. And we've got the store, the repository, which is where we keep instances of our model, and we can deploy to it and deploy from it. And it's got a series of features, security and versioning and enhanced catalog information. And if you want to know more about M and the M series of languages, we are giving away copies of this book at the CSD lounge. You can just go and ask and tell them I said so. Also, there are a couple of very attractive posters. They contain no useful information whatsoever. You absolutely need copies of these. We have thousands. They are pretty. Okay. That's it. That's all we have. Thank you very much for coming.
Are we going to take some questions?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you'd like to, if you'd come up to the mics, please.
Yep.
If you have questions, we're going to start on the left. We're going to go left, middle, right, left, middle, right. That's my left, not your left.
Stage left.
Stage left.
That's
Thank
correct.
you.
Yes. We were so thorough.
We were so thorough. We were so clear.
We were.
I think it was the Norwegian.
Yes, I think that. I had no idea that was German. I honestly didn't. Oh, where's the question?
Where's the question? Ah, excellent. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Please speak clearly into the mic.
I'll try. Could you back up to that folder business with the 102? I saw you define the field in the friendship, but I never saw you populate the field.
Yes,
Yes. Okay. So I can show you where that is.
It's one of our queries. Where is it?
It was one of our queries. Here it is. Here it is. So if I just run, this is just a query against the app definition again. So we saw one part of the app definition. This is a query against another part of the app definition. And this is actually, I don't have enough room to show it, apparently. So this is the insert statement that the web service workflow actually runs. And it has a default value in it, which basically says all the data goes into folder 102.
Okay, yeah, that's what I never saw. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, we didn't show that. That's entirely our fault.
Yes.
Question in the middle? No. Question on the right? Yes, sir.
Your breakfast cereal looks very nice, but I'm actually a Belgian waffles fan myself.
Okay.
If I were masochistic enough to want to implement parts or all of your repository as like a web service or something, would I be able to do that? Is there an interface or something?
Right now, the repository is just a SQL database. Okay, so we've not done any work to expose that data directly as web services. There's nothing to stop you or anybody else doing that, but we haven't done any work to enable that yet. It's totally something we could think about.
So the rest of the Oslo stack, Quadrant, etc., depends on the repository actually being a SQL database.
Quadrant runs against the repository, yes.
Gotcha.
M itself, you can write models in M and deploy those into any database if you're using the standard T-SQL.
Mm-hmm.
If you're using the repository SQL, then you need to deploy into a repository because it's expecting certain things to be in there. But you can take models and run them into ordinary T-SQL and deploy those into any database.
Thanks.
Any SQL database.
Any SQL database. Thank you. Yes, sir.
verktøyet Oh, sorry. English.
Lars!
Lars!
Yay! The STS export tool, is it available?
Oh, so actually, I'm glad you asked that, Lars, because right before the talk, I was like, wow, guys, those are really great tools. Are you going to make them available? And he looked at me and he said, no. Oh. And then I told him somebody would ask. And if somebody asked, would he deploy, would he make them available on that little website we built? And you know what he said? He said, maybe.
Maybe. Okay. Thank you.
All right, so yeah, I'll try and do some work to get that thing into a state where it's actually usable without prior knowledge and get something up on the Dev Center.
Great.
Thanks.
Question in the middle? No. Question on the right?
No. Question
Great.
on the left.
Back to the left.
Okay. So I saw you deploying from a service that you created on this on the demo. How do you see this fitting into existing services? Is there any best practice for getting that into the service model on an existing service?
If your services are existing WCF services that are written in and that are using workflow,
we have a tool.
We have a tool that if you can take an OM, so you basically instantiate the OM, save it away as XAML, and then we have a tool which will actually take the XAML and shred that across the various tables, and actually put all of that application data into the database.
So that's one way to do it, and that gives you kind of full fidelity all the way in. And so we have that repository to from.exe, right? That's what that's for. The other thing you can do is, in fact, you can go to Quadrant and you can say, I have a web application. Maybe it's a web service, maybe it's whatever it is, where you have an interactive application. And you can bring those resources, those files that make up your application, directly into Quadrant and shred them into the repository. It won't be as rich as if it was workflow and we could dig to the next level of detail, but you can still use the deployment features of Quadrant to pull it in and then push it to other machines.
So does that mean I have to type in endpoints and stuff like that on my in the repository, or
you will have to populate? Yeah, the answer is you will have to populate the repository with endpoints and configuration information.
And the same goes for workflows?
Absolutely, yes. The same configuration information is needed for both. Other questions? Middle. Right.
Yes, sir.
When you generated the entity model, was there any additional option that could have pulled in the parties so that you could have done a query to get the names of the...
Oh, right, yeah, great question.
Well, you know what the question is. You should answer it.
So you did the work with the entity framers. The question is, we were just getting the numbers. Could we have done some extra work to do a join across the parties table in system.identity to get the names of the people?
Yeah, so Judge and I are very low-level fellows, and so friendship is numbers. We got no problem with that at all. But it's just SQL data. So you can do the joins and the queries, and of course, the parties table has name and employer and all that information, and you can write queries. And in fact,
the information's in the catalog about the parties table,
right?
And the information is in there.
Definition. Yes. The new party was the type.
Yeah. So we could have done that. We didn't actually do that particular piece of work, but the information is all there for us to actually go there. Yes.
And if you read in here, it's all about computed values, which is about producing views that can do arbitrary joins across tables, and it's all in here. It's all in there.
Yes, sir.
So when you post the tools, the source code would be awesome too. But my question is, so
I agree.
What about, so my question is, what about indexes, or if I have so many instances of my data, I need to partition it. What happens when performance becomes a concern?
Great. So one of the things we've done with the back end of the compiler, which is the bit that actually generates all the SQL, is there's currently a pipeline that you can plug into. So we give you the graph that is the SQL that we're about to generate. And if you want to go and modify that to add your own indexes, for example, that kind of thing, then you can actually do that. You can actually write code against the SQL graph to actually do that. The partitioning thing, we're still working on how to express that, whether we're going to be able to express that directly in M, or whether it's going to be a SQL rewriter scenario. We're actually using that pipeline ourselves. So the T-SQL that we generate, which is the kind of the standard SQL, and the repository SQL, we just run that extra step in the pipeline to rewrite the table definitions to be views with tables and the grants for the security and indexes and all the rest of it. So you can do the same thing, and we'd love to get feedback on whether that experience is reasonable or whether you'd like some other way of actually expressing that stuff.
And of course, if you go to the Dev Center, the Oslo Dev Center, msdn.microsoft.com/Oslo, you will find that in addition to being able to download bits and articles and things, there is a forum where you can ask these questions, and we can have big discussions about these kinds of things, and we take suggestions from there, as well as there's a Connect database, so you can report bugs and say, this is an important feature for me, and then here's how I need it to work. And those bugs go into the exact same bug database that we use internally to consider for features. So you can do that kind of thing too.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, and then if there are any more, we'll take them outside or in the lounge. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Yes. You have, I can see the usefulness that you can deploy things to test and then deploy to live after you make sure that you get everything deployed in the right way. What if you want to have differences between when you deploy to test and to live? Is that something you can go for in the model?
So can you give an example of a kind of difference you would like to see?
For instance, we have a data center in my company, and in tests we are usually not allowed to put a load on the live data center. So we have to connect, for instance, to a different data center. So it could be a connection string or something.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So right away, I mean, as part of the tool set, you can say mx.exe/ and then I forget what the name of the command line is, but you can choose the connection string, all the connection strings. So you can say, well, I want to deploy to the test and tell it where that goes, and then I want to deploy live and tell it where that goes, and that can be all completely different.
Yeah, but could you incorporate that in your model, that you have different settings for test and for live, for instance?
So I can envisage a couple of ways to do that. You'd have to you basically model the data for the connection string, if we just take that as the example, in the tables, and you'd populate that with particular model with your test data, and then you deploy, and your deployment script would know to basically look there and say, all right, okay, that means I deploy over there. And then you'd basically run an update to the model to rewrite that connection string to be the live database when you do the second deployment. So I can see ways of making that happen.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, thanks everybody. If there are any more questions, Chris and I will be in the lounge with the great big balloons that say M and Oslo. We'll be there after this talk, and we'll also be there tomorrow morning. We'll also be at the Ask the Experts session this evening. If you have any questions,
along with all the rest of the Oslo team.
Along with all the rest of the Oslo team.
Yes.
So
yes.
if you have questions, please come and ask. We'll be headed straight out so that the next person can set up.
Thanks.